anyways, so I was tasked to build a bow and arrow target box, and the buddy who asked me to build it wants it 24 by 24, and he wants it lightweight as possible. So what I've done so far, and I'll tilt my screen down, so anybody who's viewing or watching this who missed the class, and you'll be able to view it again. So if you can see my screen right here, I already have one of the side panels for it. So it's going to be 4 different sides like that. It'll be an open box, kind of like the skeletal frame that you've seen within there. What I've had to do is actually cut a groove down through the boards to allow this piece of plywood to actually fit down within it. So, and it actually, everything comes apart on it. So the top comes apart, bottom comes out, the sides come out and everything. And so I wanted to make sure I rough fit it before I glue it and nail it or do anything along those lines to make sure everything fits properly. Now, these are harsh edges right here. It doesn't look pretty nice. Like anything that I do, I like to put my own little flair or spin on it to make it look as nice and neat as possible. So if you have a square edge, what's gonna end up happening is, like, if you bang it against another square edge, what's gonna happen is it's gonna splinter out. When you hit it, it's gonna pop out, splinter out. So I'm actually gonna go to the router and I'll router the inside and the outside of these pieces just to make it smoother, and that way it doesn't break or chip or anything. So that's one thing I did. So if you do look on the Google Classroom, the questions have already been posted on there. So I'll switch my screens right here on Zoom. So it says, what's the difference between cross-cutting and ripping a piece of stock / wood material? Wire, when constructing the frame for the arrow target, why 2 sides are the same and why 2 are different? What is the type of joinery used to put the plywood in the frame? So let me talk about cross-cutting and ripping. So I'll start with a piece of wood or stock. I'll call it stock, wood, material, I'll call it multiple different things so you guys can actually see this. All right, so this is a piece of wood. If you look at it, you can see that there's rings, and that's the ring of growth of the tree each year. So if you look at this, you can see the rings and everything along those lines. So each year represents a new year of growth, and that is the end grain right there, actually. And then you look off to the side, you can actually see the grain. So the grain is the side view of actually those rings every year that the tree grows and everything. So if you're doing a cross cut, you're cutting across the grain. So across the grain itself. So you're cutting across the piece of wood. That's why it's called a cross cut. Now, if you're ripping it, you're ripping through the grain. So if you're going this way and in my hand's the saw blade, what is happening is I'm actually ripping through it to make it into a smaller piece or thin it and everything along those lines. So that would be a rip cut or ripping through a piece of wood. So that's the difference between cross cutting and ripping. So if you haven't noticed already, I just gave you the answer to number 1, so you're able to answer that question within the Google Classroom itself. All right, so after I cross-cut it to the length that I need. I ripped it down, so you can see it's not a 2x4 anymore. It's actually a smaller piece, so it's a 1-inch piece of stock. And then I put a groove down in it. So the way this plywood fits into this frame that I made, and I'll get a smaller piece to show you this. All right, so I cut a groove on the table saw, which you'll see me actually cut another groove within the table saw itself, just like this. So it actually fits into this groove. That way it's going to be structurally sound, and it's going to stiffen up the box itself. Now, this is actually my test piece, so I want to go over that too. My test piece, always run a test piece. So you can see that the top channel or the top groove, all right, so that's the joinery or the groove to put the plywood into the piece of wood. That's the answer to the next question. All right, is a little bit bigger than the bottom one. So you always run a test piece. Reasoning behind it is because if you're doing multiple cuts and all that, like this is still set up for the same, so I can just run through, rip it. If I mess up a piece, I don't have to set up the table saw again. All right, and then you can see that the test piece, when I first started, this has a lot of play. So you can see it moves, it wiggles a lot. That's not what I'm looking for. On the other piece, I had to readjust the saw blade, and there's no play in it, so it's gonna make it a very strong yet lightweight frame for the target arrow itself. So if you look at this, there's a lot of play in it. And then on the actual piece, it's tight. So I have it set up to the way I want it. Now, I'm gonna move this stuff off the table so you don't want anything in your way or obstructing your view. I'll move everything off of this side too, just because you don't want anything in your way when you're cutting or ripping within the table saw itself. So I'm actually going to mute you guys on Zoom. And you'll hear the dust evacuation system come on and everything, and then I'll rip a couple pieces because I have to rip it for the other side and a couple other sides, so you guys get to watch that. Got my safety glasses on, of course. All right, for those of you who are actually still here or watching that, so that's just being able to rip a groove through the piece of wood all the way down it. If you notice, I ripped it through one way, then turned around the opposite way and ran it back the other way. So the way I have this set up is so it's perfectly center in that 1 by 1 inch piece of wood, and then I just have to rip out this little leftover material in there. Now there's a couple different ways. Also, if you notice, I have my safety glasses on. I've had a serious eye injury before, and it was not fun. When your eyes are one of your most important senses, so you need to protect yourself. Now I'm just using a flathead screwdriver or a standard screwdriver and just pushing it over to pop that piece of wood out. It's a lot easier to do it that way instead of taking your finger and then risking getting a splinter. So now I have my groove within here. I'm gonna pop this out a little more too. All right, so I have my groove cut into my piece of wood here, so it goes all the way down the little channel, and that's what my piece of plywood board is actually going to sit in. All right, so the answer to your question, all right, we go back to the Google Classroom and that, so I can answer this. So we've already gone over what is the difference between cross-cutting and ripping pieces of stock/material while constructing the skeletal frame for the arrow target. Why are two sides the same and two sides are different? All right, so I'm going to talk about that here in a second. And then what is the type of joinery used to put the plywood in the frame? So I've already gone over that. The type of joinery, it's called a groove. All right, so the groove actually goes, or the channel, I call it, it looks like a channel, but it's called a groove. It goes all the way down it, and so the piece of plywood actually sits in it. So that's the correct answer for that. Now, if you notice, some of these sides are longer than the others. I know it's kind of difficult to see where you're standing right now, but I'll hold it up so you can see this. So you can see these two sides are 2 inches taller than this. The reasoning behind that is, in order to have a 24-inch by 24-inch inside measurement for the sofa cushion to fit in, essentially that's what he's putting there is a sofa cushion, so that way it slows down the velocity of the arrow. That's the size of the foam or cushion that he's actually going to put in there, so he can actually have something to shoot into. So the reason why it's 2 inches taller is because the material is actually 2 inches or 1 inch in squared. So you can see when I put these together, these line up and add up. All right, and I'm gonna tilt my camera down so I can reiterate it and show you this. So these are two longer sides. This is the shorter side. So what it is they coincide with each other, which I'm gonna need some more space. So I'm gonna go over here to the table saw to show you this. That way you guys get a better understanding, or I should say a better view of why two sides are longer than the other. So in order to have that 24 inches by 24 inches inside measurement, so the length and width, 2 feet by 2 feet, two sides are longer by 2 inches because the thickness of the material itself is 1 inch. So I have the shorter sides on the inside, and I know you guys can't see this on the camera, the students are within the Zoom class. Two sides are shorter because it's actually 24 inches long, and then the two side pieces are actually the correct length. So within here, if you look here, all right, this is 24 inches, and then these are the two 26-inch pieces. So it's that way, it's 24 by 24. I put a tape measure onto it. I already know this piece is already 24 inches long because I've already cut it that long. So it's 2 feet exact, all right, and then 2 feet within here. Regardless of the fact that this is 26 inches long, if you account for the 1 inch here and the 1 inch here, thick piece of material, that's why it's still 24 inches in height or width.